How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Chair Talk. Guys, we've been talking about false confessions lately, and yesterday we did a video that broke down the read technique. We did apply it to the Delphi murders. We kind of discussed pretty in length, pretty deep, the interrogation of Richard Allen from, well, three detectives, but the main focus was Detective Holman. Now, granted, we didn't see any videos, but this was just coming from transcripts. So today, what I would like to do is going to interview Joe Pangaro. He's been on my show before. He's a retired lieutenant, and he's done a few interviews. And there was one that led to a false confession in which he believes he could have been responsible for. What I mean by responsible is that he could have led this person to falsely confess. He actually has a book on the market. I'll have him introduce himself shortly. And then, guys, before we do this interview, I will bring on Joe. I'll introduce him. But then I want to show you a video I got. It's a couple of months old, but it's going to show you a gentleman who was being interviewed or interrogated about his father being missing, which turned out that he was then being accused of killing his father. And it turned out he started to believe it. When in all actuality, his father wasn't dead. His father winds up showing up later on, I believe, by the father's girlfriend's house. And the gentleman did sue, and he got over $900,000 from what I read. But you're going to see a quick video. It's about 4 or 5 minutes, and you can actually see the person breaking down mentally. It's an insane video. So I wanted to show that, and then we'll go into the discussion with Joe. But let me get Joe on first, just to introduce him. What's up, Joe?
How's everybody?
Good. Joe, you mind introducing yourself, please?
Sure. Lieutenant Joe Pangaro. I'm the CEO of Pangaro Training. I also have my own podcast, the Blue Heart Podcast. Obviously, you can see that. I am an author. I write for a company called Blue 360 Media. So I have a couple of books out, The Investigation over here on how to conduct a complete and thorough criminal investigation. And then the other book that I think is what got Anthony's attention is that, sorry about that, something happened here, got Anthony's attention, is my book, The Interview. All right, so that was the first book I wrote. I spent 27 years in law enforcement, most of it in the investigative division. I enjoyed every minute of being a detective, and I did interview hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. I learned some skill sets, how to interview. I've taken many, many different kind of training courses that are out there for you. That and real experience helped me to develop my own particular style, my shtick, as my partner I used to call it, of how to conduct these interviews.
Right, and guys, I the reason why I've been doing a little bit about the interview process, especially pushing on the read technique, is we saw it being explained a little when they did the interrogation of Richard Allen. So I thought we could dive in deep and give people a better understanding of how the read technique works. Now, if you saw the video yesterday, you could also know that this read technique is a push and pull of emotion. I mean, it truly is. Once you get past that interview and you start making those accusations towards that individual, I mean, it is going to be a back and forth of emotion, and it could be very confusing for the person being interviewed. Because it's that intense. So what I want to do real quick, guys, is I want to show you this quick video. It's about 4 or 5 minutes. And it's going to show you a very intense interrogation, which led to a false confession. Now, in this case here, when we're talking about false confession today, we are talking about people that actually start to believe after they're being interrogated that they've actually committed the crime. So we're not talking about people that knowingly put a false confession, but we're talking about people who have been influenced to some extent to believe that they've done the crime and now unfortunately make the confession. So let me go ahead and share this video real quick. It's a very interesting video. Hold on 1 second.
Murdered your dad.
No, I did.
Yes, you did. Yeah, yes. Daddy's dead because of you.
Hours of interrogation. Police lying to a suspect in the Inland Empire until he falsely confesses to murder. And now the city of Fontana is paying a massive settlement tonight after police questioned a man for 17 hours until he confessed to killing his father, who's still alive. KCAL News reporter Tom Waite joins us now with what led up to this false and really hard to watch confession.
It was, Pat, and I watched many hours of this intense interrogation, and it's very eye-opening. And we'll get to it in just a second here. But the video of the interrogation is fascinating and disturbing. An innocent man spends hours being grilled by police. When it's over, he's in the throes of a full mental breakdown. And under pressure, he lies to detectives about killing his own father.
We don't think you're a monster, Thomas.
Fontana police detectives grilling Thomas Perez Jr. after Perez Jr. reported his father missing. This interrogation descends into what's being described as psychological torture after the detectives extract a false murder confession from Perez.
We just told you we found your dead dad, and you don't give a.
That detective is lying. Perez Sr. was not dead. But in this moment, Fontana detectives don't know where he is. Perez Jr. reported him missing after they had an argument. A search warrant was served at the family home. Perez Sr.'s wallet, cell phone, and even some blood stains were discovered. A canine also alerted to the odor of possible human remains. Detectives unleash an unrelenting interrogation of Perez Jr.
Murdered your dad.
No, I did
Yes, you
not.
did.
Yeah.
Yes.
Daddy's dead because of you.
No.
Yes. Not only that, but poor Morgan here.
Margot.
Margot had to witness it.
Yeah. I walked through the blood.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
Yes.
The psychological effects of hours of grilling take their toll. Detectives keep pushing. Perez spirals further. Eventually, Perez Jr. makes a false confession to killing his father. All this, and 71-year-old Perez Sr. was alive. He went to his girlfriend's home, but didn't have his cell phone. Perez Jr.'s attorney.
The worst act of deliberate cruelty that I've seen suing the police for 40 years. I've been suing the police for 40 years, and I've never seen the cops be that cruel to someone.
Steering on behalf of Perez Jr. sued Fontana and won a nearly $900,000 settlement. This all unfolded back in 2018, but the case was just finalized.
I never thought that it was easy, maybe even possible, to get a completely innocent person confess to something like that. But after I watched the video and watched the interrogation of Tom Perez, what I divined is that they could get you and I to confess to killing Abe Lincoln if they wanted to. It's unbelievable. And they're not amateurs, and they know what they're doing, and they know how to do it.
Steering says even after detectives learned Perez Sr. was alive, they did not tell Perez Jr. Instead, they had him held for mental distress.
Once they learn this, instead of telling him that because of what they did to him, they 5150 him. They place him on a civil protective custody hold, have him taken to the mental hospital, and then they tell the hospital that he's in custody and that he can't have anybody contacting him.
We reached out to Fontana Police and the city of Fontana before the end of business today for comment, but we did not hear back. So
That is a crazy video, Joe. Hey, Joe, just real quick before we go into your story, when the lawyer says at the end that basically he believes that he can even get people like us, or the police can get people like us to confess to the killing of Abe Lincoln, do you think that's true?
Well, I don't know so much about Abe Lincoln, but I can tell you that psychological pressure is probably the most powerful thing that we do when we interview somebody. And you certainly can get people to falsely confess to things. You can stress them out to the point that you blend reality and your story, and it can overwhelm them, right? You overwhelm their ability to resist you, and they will often go into that. There's lots of reasons that we can talk about. I mean, sometimes they just want you to stop. So they tell you what you want to hear. They take cues from you, what you're saying, and then they concoct a story so that, okay, I confess, leave me alone. Other times you can actually push them beyond their mental abilities to resist. and they can start to believe things. And that's kind of what happened in a case that I worked.
Hey, Joe, out of curiosity, so when the detective pushes the pressure, obviously you would expect the person to resist, but then once they start to weaken, are you telling me then they start to accept it?
At certain points. Now, I think I heard right here, Anthony, you could tell me if I'm right or wrong, that this was a 17-hour interview.
Yes.
It didn't say a lot about breaks. I mean, that right there, I could tell you in a modern courtroom, I can't imagine that kind of a interrogation is going to be given. And I say the wrong word, not interrogation. Interview is going to be looked at positively. 17 hours of stress on someone, you're going to break their will. There's no doubt about it. And when you're interviewing people, all of these things you have to think about, what you're doing, how you're doing it, what it's going to look like. Like, this is on video. We're all on video now. So you have to understand when a judge and a jury watch this, this attorney called them cruel. And I can say, as I'm hearing them say that, I'm thinking, is it cruel? Do we care about, psychological pressure that makes people feel bad? Don't we want the confession? Well, I think we do. But the reality is we have to be professional of how we do it. And we have to keep these things in mind. You don't want a false confession. You don't want to really, it sounds that way because it's a criminal, right? Oh, you hurt their feelings. It's not hurting their feelings. You could traumatize someone, like we saw with this guy, obviously traumatized when he was told his father's dead and he didn't do it. 17 hours is a long time. You can really twist somebody into a knot in 17 hours.
Joe, I noticed you corrected yourself. You didn't want to say interrogation. Is there a change in language?
Yes, let me explain this. And the reason I say that is because when I teach this course, people conflate words, right? Words mean things. What I say, what you say, what a suspect says, every single word means things. And depending on the process that you're in, if there's jeopardy and you poke their jeopardy, that's what I call it. And people will say certain things to protect themselves, to obfuscate the story or whatever. But in law enforcement, we often make a mistake by saying, well, we interrogated this guy for 3 hours. Interrogation is completely different than interview. Interview is a back and forth. It's an exchange of information. I ask a question, you ask a question, I give some information, you give information. In a criminal interview, you're moving from point A to point Z, and you want to bring this person along with you. So interview is a back and forth. There's no coercion involved in it. You do build up psychological stress to get people to react body language wise, so that you can read their body language based on certain questions. But an interrogation is a completely different process. An interrogation is, as opposed to the interview, which is back and forth, an interrogation is one-sided, the cop side, and that's it. And you don't let the person talk unless they're going to confess. So every time they start to come up with, that's not right, you stop them. And then you go back and you reiterate your evidence, you reiterate your points. You go back and you don't let them talk unless they're going to start confessing. So if you got in front of an attorney and in your report you wrote, we interrogated this guy for 3 hours, and the attorney understands the difference between interview and interrogation, you're going to have a hard time on that stand, because they're going to, first of all, ask you for the definitions of each. They're going to ask you for an example of each. And then they're going to say, and how was this an interrogation? And if they can make the jury see that you don't even know the difference in the terms, you're going to have a problem right off the bat, that everything you did was wrong. You're not a professional. So when I read police reports and I talk to police officers, and they will say to me, oh, we interrogated this guy for, 3.5 hours, 4 hours, whatever. You didn't interrogate him. You interviewed him very intensely. But if you interrogated him for 4 hours, that's how you started. That's not how you start the process. You're going to have a hard time. So that's why I always want to make crystal clear, because we do conflate the words. I just did it myself. And it's a reality. It's a different process, an interview to an interrogation. That's why I like to make it clear.
Yeah, I told people in yesterday's show that, obviously the interview is building a rapport, trying to get the person's baseline, a lot of things happening. But then when you cross into that accusation, when you start crossing into what could be a heated discussion, or in this case here, the interrogation, there's no turning back. Like that's it. Now the rapport is broken, and now you are going to try to see if you can get this person to admit whatever the evidence you have. I want to ask one more thing before you go into your story. I think the balance with the interrogation, and I don't know how it gets managed. I just think maybe some people just have the natural skill. Because don't get me wrong, I know people teach these techniques, but there's got to be people that just understand human behavior, understand emotion a little bit better than most. So you may be able to teach somebody this technique, but maybe they bring to the table an understanding of human emotion, whether they can translate it to someone else or whether they just know it. But my biggest thing is when you're going through that interrogation and you're making the allegations, and you may not know, but you're starting there. How do you kind of keep yourself balanced, knowing that, okay, if this is the guy, I got to try to get him to admit, or if this is the suspect, I got to try to get them to admit, but I also have to remember I'm dealing with someone that could also be innocent.
Yeah. All right. So the process that you're talking about, when we sit down with somebody, you said the word baseline, and that's true. When you start an interview, I've seen lots and lots of officers go right in and they start the accusation. We're investigating a robbery. We're investigating a sexual assault or rape or whatever. And you're the person responsible, and they go right at them. At that point, you're hitting somebody who's trying to protect themselves. And we're talking a guilty person who's going to talk to you, but they think they're going to get over on you. All of a sudden, they start to hear those words. They hear those very harsh words: sex assault, robbery, murder. You start to hear those things. And all of a sudden, the lawyer word comes to mind. Because it's been my experience over many, many, many years of doing this, is that if you can get past Miranda with most people, because most people, criminals, are used to lying to everybody in their life, and you're just another dope for them to lie to, and they're going to play you just as well as you think you're going to play them. And if you don't understand the psychological underpinnings of how people are concerned about their safety, what their jeopardy is, right? If you don't have jeopardy, and I talk to you about anything, and you have no jeopardy in the conversation, you're not going to display any kind of suspicious body language or deceptive activities. You're not going to do that because you have no jeopardy. It's when you have jeopardy because you've done something and you want to bring that out of them slowly. So you start out with your baseline, because I want to see how they react, how they answer, how they look me in the eyes, how their body language is when they have no jeopardy. So I make it calm, relax. You want a soda? You want a cup of coffee? I appreciate you being in here. I just want to get your side of the story. You go through Miranda, and then you say, okay, listen, what are you wearing? A Mets shirt? You like the Mets? What just happened with the Mets, right? So you talk about anything you can other than the criminal activity you're investigating, and you will see them relax. And when they relax, now you'll see good eye contact. You'll see good body positioning. You'll see good answer. Their timing is good. They're listening to you. They might be laughing. Oh, the Mets, whatever. They had a tough season, whatever it is. And you go through that for as long as you think you need, so that you can see how somebody responds in all these different things that we're looking at when they have no jeopardy, right? They're relaxed. They're talking about baseball. They're talking about their kids, Halloween, whatever it is. Then you say, okay, listen, you transition. So the transition is important too, because now you're going to see all of those things when you transition into now asking questions about the crime. You've just seen them now relaxed. It might take 10 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, cup of coffee, you're BSing, you're doing whatever. And then you transition maybe with something like, listen, that's really awesome. Maybe the Mets will win next year. I certainly hope they do. They tried. But right now, I got to talk about this incident. Okay, this situation where somebody went into somebody's house and some bad things happened in there, right? And I appreciate that you're here. Now, when you say that, I didn't use harsh words. So in my book, what I talk about is the big four, right? So the first one is diminishing the words we use. If I'm talking about rape and murder and shooting and robbery, those are scary words. So I talk about somebody went into somebody's house and some things happened, right? That's not as harsh. That's less, but that will also trigger them now. It'll trigger their jeopardy. I'm poking at it because now they know they have to talk about the situation or talk themselves out of it or talk around it, whatever. And you will see physical changes. You will see them tighten up. You'll see a body language change. You'll see their expressions change. You'll see how they answer you. All of these are indicators of deception. And there's only two things you look for in an interview. You look for truth and you look for deception. And if you have truth and you can keep pursuing it and you get a feeling, okay, this is pretty legitimate answers based on your case, your investigation, whatever you're doing, you can be confident this person's probably not involved or not involved to the extent you thought. If you see deception, and deception does not always mean guilt. It can mean guilt, but often it means that there's something that this person doesn't want to reveal to you. Maybe it's other crimes, maybe it's other things they're involved in, a personal lifestyle thing they don't want to talk about, whatever. You have to pursue it then when you see the deception. And you pursue it with conversation, asking questions. It's a back and forth with the person. And when you transition into that, that's an important moment. Just like transitioning into an interrogation, once you've exhausted the interview and you know they're right there, there's all the indicators, but they just can't come across and tell you. That's when you transition into an interrogation. You might leave the room for a while. You might come back with a case file, and then you take a much more stern stance with them. You don't threaten people. You don't hit them with phone books and all that nonsense from TV. It's not a back and forth anymore. Now it's me telling you, you did this. I know you did it. My case tells me you did it. And the best thing for you now is to tell the truth, right? So that's a transition. So there's many transitions in a criminal investigation that is an interview and then transitions into an interrogation. There might be a point where you go into interrogation and they start to give up some more stuff, and now you transition back to interview. Thanks. I don't know why you held that away from me all this time. We've been talking for 2 hours here, and now you're changing your story. How come? What's going on? You go back to that. Now maybe that moves the interview forward. So it's really, it's a dynamic event that takes place. And just let me say one more thing, something you mentioned. You're saying that it could be emotional for the person. Let me tell you what, it can be emotional for the interviewer as well, depending on the case. We're all human beings. You have a very serious case, a child raped and murdered. That's going to be weighing on your mind, and you're sitting with this person, right? And you got to get next to them. You got to make a relationship with them for that short period of time, where you can talk and trust and listen and understand and all these kind of things so that they feel safe with you and comfortable. And then when you're making all these observations, you poke their jeopardy, you move them forward, then you bring out some evidence maybe, and then you'll start to see that they're on the run now. Now you have to understand, what are they afraid of? Going to jail? Humiliation to the community, depending on what they've done. It could be the death penalty, it could be anything. Once you now understand that, as the interviewer, when you've made this relationship with them, now you're like a lifeline, right? You're like a lifeline. Is okay, I know I'm not getting out of here now. How do I make this the best I can for myself? And that's you, the interviewer, that's going to convince them, I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you get through this. And it's amazing how people will roll over and start telling you things that you're saying to yourself in the back of your head. I can't tell you how many times I sat here going, this guy's putting himself in prison for 30 years because he's telling me this, but that's my job, and I did my job well.
I know I yesterday we discussed like minimization, maximization, and basically I love what you said. Like, you minimize kind of what they've done because they may connect it to a consequence, like or what's socially acceptable. Like, I'm murder. No, I'm not. You're not going to get me to admit to that, but an accident happened. What happened at the house? And then obviously we had the maximization where you can exaggerate or where you can maybe lie in an effort to trap the person. I mean, it's a lot different when you tell someone at the very beginning of the interview, it's open, so tell me what happened that day, as opposed to later on saying, tell me your side of the story. Like, your side of the story is going to be a bit tougher because they got to see where they have to navigate around. And
Yes.
You want to kind of keep on bringing them back to those areas where you could see the stress. It's like, okay, well, it's funny. They give me a timeline of every 15 minutes, but in this one area, the timeline jumped an hour. So I want to go back and find out what that gap is,
Yep.
what's going on in that hour. Hey, Joe, so obviously you know this technique very well, and especially after doing hundreds of interviews. Do you think, I know there is one story you're going to share today, but do you think influencing a false confession is rare, or do you think it happens more than we would like to think?
I'm going to think, based on my own experience with this, once it happened right in front of my face with my partner and I, as we were investigating a serious crime. And I said, wow, we could probably push people more often into confessing for, like I said, many reasons. Maybe they just want us to stop and go away. Good. Let them charge me. Let me get a lawyer. Let me get away from these guys because they just won't stop. And, then I'll tell my lawyer I didn't do it and, whatever. But I don't think it happens every single day. And I think it depends on the interviewers. Watching those guys in the video, some of the things that I saw, where they keep arguing with the guy back and forth. I get it. They're trying to convince him that they don't believe him. And I wasn't in that room with them, so I'm not going to make a judgment on the full thing. But I know it does happen. And the more skillful you are at using these techniques, at understanding human psychology, I think those kind of interviewers can push people into false confessions if they're not careful. It is a skill that has power behind it, right? And if you don't wield that appropriately, I think you can. Well, I know you can. You can get someone to confess falsely.
Well, let's share your story. Now, this story is also in your book, correct?
Yes, it is. All right. So I do the interview by Joe Pangaro, right? It's available from Blue 360 Media. It's also on Amazon. You can go in there and get a copy of it. It is a soup to nuts how to do a thorough criminal interview. And like I said, I've taken just about every course that you can take out there on interview. There's lots of different philosophies on how to do a criminal interview. Taking all of that, learning from other people, their styles, their skills, is what led me, as I did interviews with my partners, with different suspects, to start to develop things that worked for me. So you can teach people everything in this book and everything that might not work for them when they're out in the field doing it, because they have a different personality, a different way of looking at things, a different way of expressing themselves. But there are dozens of things in here that will work for you if you try them, practice them, right?
Hey, Joe, can I ask a question? So
Sure.
I also remember reading this book. I do have both of them. I also believe it is educational, don't get me wrong, but it's also story format. So if you're from the outside looking in, and let's say you're a true follower of true crime and you want to know a little bit more of maybe this process here, it is something that even someone from the outside could pick up to get a better understanding, correct?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the interview is much more of a teaching the techniques and the concepts with stories. I add stories in because stories always make it easier to say, oh, this is what the guy just said, and then let's see how it actually worked in the real world. So I do that in my classes as well. I use stories to back up what I'm saying. In the investigation book, that's the one that just came out. This is the one where I worked a very, very brutal double homicide that involved a mafia family, and a guy cut the head, hands, and feet off of people. And I was writing it as a screenplay, right? I was taking this idea as a screenplay or a novel, a true crime novel. And when I talked to the publisher, they said, listen, why don't we do something different? Why don't you tell part of the story and then stop and say, okay, let's learn what we can learn. So what we do is, in that book, I talk about how the killer got from where he was to the crime scene. And I say, let's stop now. You're the investigator. Let's go back and figure out how we could have tracked that person, right? With all the things that are out there, digital cameras, all that stuff. Could we follow where this person went? Then I go back to the story and I tell him at the crime scene how he kills everybody, the horrible things he does. And I stop it and say, now let's go back. You're the crime scene investigator. What is important to you? What do you need to look at? Blood spatter, evidence, everything involved with that. Then I go back and tell the story of how he confessed, and then preparing for the major case when he went to trial. It was a nightmare of him, his antics and what he did, and how do you prepare for that? Then I go back and teach how we prepared for that and how you can prepare for any major case. So in that one, if you're a true crime buff, the investigation is awesome, but it's also great for any officer anywhere that has to investigate anything. It's a soup to nuts process to understand what's in a thorough investigation. So thank you for asking me that.
Yeah, of course. So, Joe, just out of curiosity, would you be able to kind of tell the narrative here of that? Now, you've only had now, guys. Remember, I mentioned at the beginning, this is not someone that just decides I'm going to write a false confession and screw it the investigators. Rather, this is someone that we was influenced into writing it, which means that they may even believe what has been pushed on them from the investigators. And I think Joe, now you said this happened once in your case where you do feel responsible that you could have put this person into a position where they may have felt more relief if they just confess.
Right. And in this particular case, in the book, the story that I tell about it is called Take a Peek. And you're describing exactly what this man was. He was somebody accused of a very, very bad thing. And he didn't actually do the bad thing. He did something. And that something, combined with our pressure, really confused him on what he actually did to what we were accusing him of. And that's where we broke his will. So the story, very simply, we had a young girl, 13, maybe 14 years old. She's living in a garden apartment, the kind of garden apartment where you come in, from the parking lot side, and there's a little mud room kind of an area, and then you go into the apartment. Well, she was living there with her mother and her mother's longtime boyfriend. All right. She wasn't with dad. She was with this longtime boyfriend, this guy. And the girl's bedroom, so to speak, the bedroom was in that little mudroom. She had a bed there, and there was the door that went out to the yard. So the mom worked day shifts and went to bed early in whatever her job was. And the boyfriend, he worked until midnight every day, whatever his job was. I don't remember offhand exactly, but he worked the afternoon shift. And he would come home, he would park in the parking lot, and he would come in through the apartment where the girl's bedroom was, and then he would go into the rest of the apartment. Well, the girl made an allegation to her mother that the boyfriend had been touching her sexually for a number of years, and she was afraid to say anything about it. She was too young, but now she realized, learning stuff in school that people shouldn't be able to do this and that. She wanted to come forward and tell her mother. Well, you can imagine the commotion that stirred up. Now, here's this longtime boyfriend. Here's this innocent young girl saying he's been touching me. Mom got very, very upset, of course, like any parent would. She calls the police, makes a police report. The daughter, at that point, we had her interviewed by people who had skill sets with children, and a advocate. Right, we thought this was a sexual assault. What she was telling us, based on
Joe, do you know? Are you able to say the age of the girl?
Yeah, I think she was 13 or 14.
Okay.
All right, so she wasn't a little kid, but she was young. Right. Now, when you hear some of these things, when you hear some things in investigations, people can take it the wrong way. It's an important part of the story is that while she was young, she was really a very attractive young girl. I mean, she was really a beautiful kid. There's no way around that. And when you hear that and you hear, oh, this guy's, touching her inappropriately, doing things sexual to her, and she's a good looking kid, you kind of say, oh, well, of course he would be doing something like that. Right. So that's a part of your investigative hypothesis, but you can't weigh everything on a thing like that. I just mention it because it's important here because we played on that when we talked to the guy. So the girl was giving a statement with a counselor and her mom, and that's going on. In the meantime, the dad.
Hey, Joe, just from the outside looking, I'm sorry. You said played on that. There may be some people in the audience that may not understand. You're talking about utilizing that to encourage the confession?
Yes, absolutely. We played on that. That was one of the factors we used to work on him. Hey, she's a good looking kid. You're not really blood. You're the stepdad. You're not, that kind of thing. So the girl is being interviewed with the counselor and mom and another detective. We had this guy. We found him where he was. We got him out. He came into headquarters. We advised him Miranda. He waived his Miranda, and we told him what the allegation was. We started our investigation. We say, listen, I don't know if this happened or not. Kids can lie. They can make things up, but it seems pretty realistic. She's talking to some experts right now, and she's giving this. And the guy's, no, I would never touch her. She's like my daughter, even though she's not my real daughter. I've been with them for years. I love her. I would never do such a thing. And we're saying, okay, So as many people know, as you get into these situations where you run up against a brick wall now, what am I going to say? Where am I going to go with this? What do I have in common with this person for me to try and work this out? So as we're talking, I said and this is exactly how it kind of developed. I said, so you come home every night, right? Summer, winter, spring, and fall, right? You come in, you park in the parking lot, and you come through the bedroom. He says, yes, that's what I do. I come through, but I never do anything. I said, okay. Have you ever come home in the wintertime and cold air blows in the room and you see the girl laying there sleeping, and have you ever put the covers up on her? And he stopped and he's thinking, yeah, I probably have. If it was cold, I'd put the blankets on her, right? So this is shortening down the story, but you kind of see where this is going. As an investigator, my job is not to get the confession immediately. My job is to get the person to put themselves in the situation and to tell me they did something and that something was wrong. Then I can go back and continue the interview, use more evidence, more pressure points, and try and pull the full truth out. So he sits there and he says, yes, I have done that. I say, okay. I said, in the summertime, have you ever come in and it's really hot in the apartment? He says, yeah, sometimes it is hot. I said, do you ever come through? Does the girl wear pajamas at night? I mean, she's a beautiful kid, right? She sleep in her underwear? What does she do? And he stopped and he kind of looked and he says, well, sometimes she does. Sometimes she sleeps in her underwear. And I said, okay, well, she's a very beautiful kid. Did you ever, as you're walking through, did you ever just stop and look and take a peek at this young girl? Right? And he stops from what he's doing and he's looking at us and he looks down and he's breathing heavy and we're saying, okay, we got him. He's not going to be able to withhold this. And he says, I've taken a peek. I've looked. She's a beautiful girl, but I never touched her. I never touched her. I said, okay. I said, so, but you have stopped to look. And why did you look? Why would you look? And he said, like you said, she's beautiful. She's beautiful. She's laying there. I'm not dead. I'm a man and I see her. She's not my daughter. So you just said she was your daughter, like your daughter. So this is confusing conversation because you're mixing up the reality of human sexuality and what goes on. You see a beautiful girl and he's admitting he stopped to take a peek, to look at this girl. So in his mind, he did do something wrong now. So his tone started to change. Now we figured we got him. Now we're just going to get him to admit he did all of these things. And she came up with a lot of stuff that he did to her. And as we're pushing him going, okay, so let's go back to this, putting the blankets on. So one of the things I talk about in the book is you diminish the words that you use, and then you come up with possibilities. That's what I call them, possibilities. Possibilities are things that you gather during all different parts of the interview about the person and their lifestyle and what they're doing that you can use in the interview. So is it possible that this happened? And you make it as societally acceptable as you can. So when I said to him, is it possible that one of these times you were putting the covers up on her? And do you tuck her in or do you just, drop the covers? What do you do? Right? I don't want to lead him. I want to give him options. And he says, well, sometimes I just pull it up and sometimes I tucked it in so she would, wouldn't come off of her again. And I'm like, okay, is it possible that one of these times you were tucking in the blankets, she woke up and thought you were touching her? Is that possible? And now he's sitting there thinking. And he says, I mean, maybe when I was tucking her in, she might have thought I was trying to touch her. I said, okay. So you're walking in, this young girl is laying there. You see her and you realize she's a beautiful kid. You stop and you look because she's attractive. Sometimes you tuck her in and she might have thought you were doing something different. And he drops his head and he's, like I said, he's breathing heavy and we're looking at him going, okay, he's going to roll over now and tell us all the stuff he did. And he says, but I never did anything more than tuck her in. And she must have thought I was touching her. We said, well, that's not what she's telling us. She's telling us not only did you tuck her in. I said, where do you think I came up with that? That I made that up out of thin air? She told us that she felt you tucking her in, and then you were touching her breasts, right? And then you were moving the covers to look at her all over her body. And he's not saying no. He's looking all around and he's saying, but I would never do anything bad to her. And oh, okay, listen, if anybody who's interviewed anybody about sexual assault things, it's one of the hardest things for people to tell you the why. They can't say, I'm attracted to a 3-year-old child. So they tell you other nonsensical stuff. Oh, the kid, I was just trying to teach the kid about love and that. So we're using that kind of a tactic with this guy. But then we continued, listen, you've told us the truth so far, but do you realize how painful it is for this young girl who saw you as her father? And now you're in there touching her. So you tucked her in, you might have touched her. I think you did. And that's the kind of thing we went with. I said, you're telling me all the things I need to know, but you must feel horrible. And it evolved from there, where he's thinking about it. He's trying to answer our questions. We didn't go for hours. We probably went for 3.5 hours with this guy. And we could see him. He was now dejected. And he says, I did such terrible things. I did terrible things to my daughter. I can't believe I did this. I should go to prison. Put me in prison. Put me in prison. So he wasn't saying to stop us from interviewing him. He had flipped over in his head that, yeah, I did look at her. I did look at her sexually. I did tuck her in. I did take a peek that I shouldn't have been doing. And I might have done these other things. In his head, he's starting to twist it around. And we kept the pressure up till he's admitting, yes, I touched her breasts. I touched her stomach. I did all kinds of things. And we were like, okay. And then he starts crying and he breaks down. I want to go to jail. Send me to jail. I'm a horrible person, et cetera, et cetera. So we said, okay, it's time for a break. We're on camera. Let's take a break now. He made the admissions. We're all good here. We'll get him something to drink, get something to eat, and then we'll come in and then we'll go for details. Because now he crossed the threshold. He did it. Now we're going to get into the other things she claims that he did. So we took a break and we came back in and said, you want something to eat? You want a cup of coffee? And he's sitting there crying, and we get a phone call while we're on this break from the other detective. And he says, how's it going there? I said, good. The guy just gave it up. He's been touching her. We're going to go back to the details. Exactly what did he do to her? Did he digitally penetrate her and all these things? This and that. And he says, slow down. Why? The girl just broke down talking to the counselor and she made it all up. I said, what do you mean she made it up? She doesn't like the way he treats her mother. And she figured if she said he touched her, mom would throw him out. And that would be the end of it. Didn't realize she was going to call the police. Didn't realize we would be getting involved in this. And the counselor is convinced that she made it up. I said, okay, thank you. Right? We hung up. Now we had a conversation. Said, we just got the guy admitting things. And now they're saying it didn't happen. So we got to go back in. We went back in and we're having our conversation. I said, so now be specific. Tell me exactly what you did. And he's now you could see he was grasping at straws. He was making up things that the girl never said. Things that she never said he did to her. He's now saying, I did this and I did this and I did that and I did this other thing. And we realized he was just pushed psychologically because he did do something wrong. He did look at the girl in a sexual way that he knew was wrong. And we put this pressure on him. And we said, listen, the young lady just said she made it up, that you didn't do any of those things. He said, no, I did all those things. Everything I said I did. I'm bad. And it took us 5 or 10 minutes to calm him down, to get him to relax enough for us to tell him, we think you're making this up now, because none of the things you're talking about that you say you did is anything that she said you did. And he just sat there staring at us. He had no idea what to do. And he says, so I go to jail now? No, you're not going to jail. You're going home. And the interview ended. And we looked at each other. A guy went out the door. We called the guy over, the other detective, and they said, yeah, absolutely, 100%. The girl's clear. She made everything up. And I was talking to my partner. I said, Chuck, we pushed this guy into this confession. A conversation was, how hard did we push? Weren't we righteous in going after him? And we were very professional the way we did it, but the psychological pressure that we put on this guy when we saw signs from him that he did something wrong. We assumed it was the whole wrong thing. And as we thought about it later on, he did do those little things, but he certainly didn't penetrate her digitally. He didn't do any of the other things that initially we thought he did. And we realized this is powerful stuff. We had better learn from this interview and be careful in the future, because obviously we could do it. We're two guys. We worked together. We knew each other very well. We knew each other's skill sets. We knew how to play off of each other. And we used that against an individual who couldn't psychologically hold up to us. And he admitted things that were not true. And we would have ended up charging him and putting him in a county jail.
So I'm wondering, Joe, like, so for a case like this, unfortunately, there is a spark of possibility that you just learn how to maneuver. Because if the person, let's say he didn't see her sexually, it's not a thought you're going to put in their head, you know. But but you were able to notice something, therefore maybe it was a spark. You know, it wasn't his daughter. She was a prettier girl. She's, you know, he happens to go through her room at night, you know, and you know, let me try this, and then you wind up having him connect to this thought because it was already in him, and then what you did was you manipulate it, sort of, right? Now, the only concern I have, and maybe for anybody outside listening in is, you know, after that's done, I'm assuming there's when you found out that he didn't do it, that the girl lied. Now you got to kind of decompress a little bit. I mean, it's not just going right in and saying, "Hey, by the way, the girl lied. You're good to go home." It's, holy shit, I may have damaged this individual, or did I create a monster?
Yeah. Well, I think in this particular case, because of the way the interview started with the guy, what we got feeling from him generally is that he did feel fatherly to this girl, and he did care about her like a daughter. And this allegation came out, and you're absolutely right. When you do any of these interviews, you know, if you have somebody who's a serial rapist of 90-year-old women, which I had that case too, and you have to talk to this person, and you have to come up with something that you have in common with them. What do you have in common with this person? It's very difficult sometimes to come up with different things, but you got to think on your feet. And what we were looking at was, okay, let's try that angle. He's not the father. The girl was convincing when she told the story. He comes through the bedroom, all the things that we're talking about. And then trying to put him in that place. Did you ever come in the winter and she's cold? Because that was my first thought. You would put the covers on the kid. And then would that be something that she mistook? Or was that he was using that as an opportunity to take advantage? I could see it either way. And the same thing in the summertime when she's coming through. And you're coming through and there's this young girl laying there. And as a father, you would say you would immediately cover the kid up, right? It's your child, right? You love the kid. You don't see them in a sexual way. But when he delayed in his answer and kind of hung there, and I said, listen, she's not really your blood. She's not really your daughter. You know, she's a stepdaughter, and she really is a pretty kid, and she's laying there. And you didn't stop and take a peek. And he hesitated, and he had done that. He had done that. That was his guilty conscience. It came out. Now, how many times did he stop and stare at the girl and look at her? It could have been every single night that he came home, but that was the jeopardy that he had. He was guilty of that, and that led him to maybe I did more. Maybe she thought I was doing something. Maybe he did once or twice do something, but the reality was that pressure was on him, and we saw it and we pursued it. Once we were done, you're right. We didn't just go, okay, you're not guilty, get out of here. We had to convince him that she's talking to, and this is why she said this, because you and your wife or you and your wife or girlfriend are having some difficult times. And she thought if she said this, you would leave the house, and then, you know, it would be this and that. And over a couple of minutes of drinking his coffee and talking to us, he stopped crying and he kind of got it. I would never hurt her. I would never hurt her. Okay. We know you didn't now. You know, thanks for talking with us and all this and that. And out the door he went. And that was a tough one. I mean, that was, but we learned a lot from that. We learned a lot. Now, we had been doing interviews for a long time. We had a skill set. We had, like I said, we had a relationship so we could play off each other. But that's why I put it in the book, because I asked that question in all my classes. Anybody think you can make somebody confess to something that didn't happen. And most people say, no, if I didn't do something, I'm not going to tell you I did it. I'm like, well, you're starting off in the wrong spot now, because you don't understand how this works on somebody's head.
I mean, obviously, you also have people that could be very highly suggestible, and then you wind up putting it into their head. But my biggest concern, even with a case like this, is that you kind of, in your effort to find if it's really him, and then granted, thank God it's not, you could ignite the fantasy.
Well,
and now when the person goes home, now what about if he does do something to the child?
That's interesting. I think it's an interesting concept, because you're right. Somebody never thought about playing football in high school, and you talk about it. Boy, you're athletic. You'd be great. And, oh, maybe I would be, or I could play the guitar, or I could sing. And you might take that idea. When you're talking about something like molesting a child that you have care for and you have love for, while I think that might be a possibility, because we know it does happen, right? It happens every single day. People molest everybody around them. I don't know that it's would be that prevalent that somebody say, hey, they didn't think it was a bad idea. I took a leak, maybe took a peek. Maybe I could do something more. I didn't get that impression. And I would think that would be a rare situation.
Yeah, I was thinking more so because, and I agree, Joe. I was thinking because when you do the exchange, it's such a deep exchange of emotion that it's not surfaced. I mean, you're really hitting into this individual. You're also making possibly when you're making the allegations, they're very detailed in nature. So for the person, let's say, to have that initial attraction, then how much does it evolve when you start to make the allegations in an effort to have them admit? And then, as I said, but for someone who doesn't have that spark of possibility, I think it would be a bit harder. Like if I was a person that just went through the room and only to get to the bedroom with my girlfriend at the time, and I never took a peek and I never did these things, we're going to be going back and forth a lot longer.
Yes, absolutely. Because you didn't do it.
And you don't have anything that you could work off of.
Right.
Which I think was a tremendous perspective. But I wanted to share this today, Joe, because I figure, we got the Delphi case going on, and now he's making the confessions. This really didn't happen. The confessions he's made has actually been when he was locked up on the phone calls. And I think there's a discussion I'm going to have with Russ. If you want to come on, I would love to have you on. I'm going to do it more sooner than later, because I think it was on, day 12 today is when they were talking about the confessions. But day 9 or 10 is when the warden came up and he started talking about conditions in solitary confinement and a whole mess of policies and practices that I don't agree with, that I would like to explore. But I think it also touches on, it was these conditions that made him confess. And I think there's just a lot more behind it. But I wanted to bring this up because there are a lot of people that were messaging me talking about, the pressure that police investigators do. And there's actually, I'll read just one of the comments I got today on the video that got to me a little bit. So, I guess they consider the back and forth once you get to the interrogation, because I know we kind of mentioned that you have the interview process when you're building a rapport, and then you have the interrogation process where now it's like it's all out. And then you're right, as Joe mentioned, you can kind of go back and forth. But once you cross into that interrogation, that rapport kind of starts to dwindle, because now you've made the allegation, even though you may go back and forth from, as you said, the interrogation and interview when you're starting to get information, but the rapport of being his friend or both being Mets fans, it's like, all right, that's not happening no more. You can't go, you did this to the girl. Hey, did you watch the Mets game yesterday? Yeah, it doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't. But what you do when you set that up is that, as opposed to being complete adversaries, you've had this interview where maybe you've exchanged a lot of information. You talked about the Mets. You got to see the person as a human being. Now, when I come back in and say, I know you did this. You can tell me you didn't do it, but I know you did it. And my evidence shows me you're going to do it. And I'm telling you, you're making a mistake. So the only thing I can think of here, the reason you're hanging back and you don't want to tell me, is you think you're going to walk out that door, that this case is not going to be proven. What do you think's going to happen to you when you get to court and I lay out this case and you're sitting here saying, no, it wasn't me. And you're going to look like a fool. You're looking like a liar. You're going to look like a person who wanted to do a bad thing, not someone who did something stupid, or they weren't thinking right, or they thought it was not what it was going to be. That's what's happening here. And I'm telling you right now, you can say whatever you want to me. I'm telling you, I sat here with you for 3 hours and I know you did this. You know you did this. The whole world is going to know you did it. How are you going to look then? Think about that, right? Because that's somewhere I weave in there. Everybody in the world, when someone asks for forgiveness, usually offers some. Well, okay, not such a bad guy. He told the truth. He did a bad thing, but he told the truth. That's so much better than someone who wouldn't. You know what I mean? So you play on that interview interaction in a different way. You don't go rock hard against somebody. Now I'm done now talking to you. You did it. You try and let them know I'm the advocate here. I'm really your advocate because I know you did it. We all can see the case shows you did it. You know what you're going to look like in front of that jury? You know what you're going to look like when you're in front of that judge and all those people are watching? You think you're getting over on me? You're not. You're causing yourself a bigger problem because I know you did it. And here's how I know you did it. And I would go through a witness. I would maybe talk about an evidence. I would talk about whatever we have and then keep working them on that end, but not letting them say anything other than add to the conversation, which is the interrogation part.
Yeah, and I actually, there's a comment here about, of course, people confess if you're torturing them for, in this case here, hours. There are some people that believe Richard Allen is innocent. Hey, Joe, anything you'd like to say in close? I thought this was a good dialogue. I hit some good moments.
No, it absolutely was. I enjoy talking about this stuff. It's a passion that I have. I grew up in Point Pleasant, New Jersey. We didn't have crime here. I became a cop. I was in a town where they did have murders. They did have drug dealers. They did have sexual assaults, all kinds of things. And I was thrown into that. And while I always had a gift of gab, so my mother used to say, you got a gift of gab. I could talk to anybody. Learning to focus that into a criminal interview to get really bad people to tell me what they did, how they did it, and why they did it was, in all honesty, it was thrilling. It was exciting. And I remember walking out of my first big case interview where a guy not only confessed, but he hugged me and thanked me for taking his statement. And I walked out of the room dumbfounded. I said, this guy just gave up 30 years of his life because he talked to me. And I said, this is the greatest job on the planet. I never want to stop doing this. So that's where, the interview comes from. And that's where the investigation comes from. So I highly recommend them, not just because they're my books, but they're filled with information for any investigator, any interviewer can learn something, no matter who you have to interview. It's all about understanding people.
And by the way, guys, we both have the same publisher, Blue 360 Media. I got books on managing inmate behavior and inmate manipulation decoded, but the way they did that effective report writing book. Oh my God, I carry that with me everywhere I go. I mean, I that's just a quick reference, but man, that book. I'm a big fan of the publishing company, Blue 360 Media. If you guys check it out. Hey guys, again, I think the next part I'm going to explore. I really want to revisit that solitary confinement discussion. Even though we have discussed it, I want to kind of re-explore it again with the background of the Delphi, and basically, did the conditions have an effect on him, and is that why he, Rich Allen, decided that he's going to admit? I just got to follow a few more episodes first because the people that do the podcast that are going into the trial, they're taking notes. I guess they do like shorthand or T-line, whatever it is. But you're talking about shows that are 4, 5, 6, 7 hours long because they're pretty much reading you like as if it's a transcript of what could be a 9-10 hour day. But hope you guys enjoy the content. As always, guys, if you don't, please like, subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe.